Hello, welcome to Michael's Menagerie. Today I am going to be covering how to plant and harvest Pygmy Sundew Gemmae. So some of you may ask, what exactly are Gemmae? So Gemmae are a modified plant leaf that is solely made for reproduction. So think of it as an exact clone or copy of the mother plant. Now, each pygmy sundew, various species will create various shapes and sizes of Gemmae and a various amount. So some will give you more or less Gemmae depending on the time of year and the energy level contained in each plant. Now, I'm going to talk about how to set up your pots to successfully grow Gemmae. So at this point, you've either purchased or harvested your own Gemmae and you want to know how to take care of them. So the first and most important thing about planting your Gemmae is picking the correct pot size. Now you may be thinking, why does that matter? Can't I just move them later? The answer to that question is no. Once you plant your Gemmae and it establishes roots, you will not be able to transplant a large adult very easily. The reason for this is because the way that their roots grow, they basically, each plant makes one very long, skinny root. If you break that root, 9 out of 10 times you're going to kill the plant, which makes them very fragile and very hard to transplant later on. So I always recommend a pot size that is at least 4 inches tall. So I usually either do like a 3 by 4 or a 4 by 4. You can do bigger pots or smaller pots. I've had success in all types of pots, but from personal experience, I have the best longevity in all of my pygmy sundews if the pots are at least 4 inches tall. Now that you've picked the correct size of pot, we're going to talk about the soil type. Now, substrate is very important for carnivorous plants because not only are nutrients very, very bad for them, they will kill your plants if you have too much nutrients or fertilizer or any other contaminants in the soil. They just don't tolerate them very well. I personally use 1 part peat moss, 1 part perlite, and 2 parts coarse silica sand. If you decide to go with sand, it is very important that you do not get sand that is too fine because it tends to become very crusty and compacts, and it will basically choke out your plants from air. You won't be able to get air, and the soil will become too dense, inhibiting growth and just making it kind of a nightmare for your plant. So if you're going to go with sand, try to pick a larger grain of sand. So once you've mixed up your soil and you have it pretty evenly mixed, I always recommend dumping water in it until it's pretty soppy. I always fill my pots with very wet, soppy soil. And then you're going to press that into the pot as hard as you can to ensure that it's well packed. The reason for this is because when you water them and you have them sitting in a tray of water, it will allow your water to seep up evenly through the pots through capillary action, which is the best way of watering Gemmae. In my honest opinion, I like to keep the soil pretty wet. The higher amount of humidity you have, the higher germination rate you will have with Gemmae. Now that you've got your pot, you've got the soil in it, and you've tightly packed it, and you've kind of rinsed off your pot, dried it, and you've labeled it for the species of Gemmae that you're going to be planting in it. Now we're going to cover exactly how to plant this. So most commonly it comes in either a little baggie wrapped in a paper towel, or it comes in a centrifuge tube that is also wrapped in a paper towel. Or you may have already harvested your own Gemmae and you've got them on the wet paper towel and you're wanting to go ahead and plant them. So the tool you're going to need is either a small plant tag, a toothpick, or some other small, very fine pointed object that you will be able to gently pick up your Gemmae with and place directly on top of your soil. Now, I've tested 2 methods of planting your Gemmae. One is to plant the Gemmae directly on top of the peat moss, the wet peat moss, or to plant them on top of the peat moss and then put a thin layer of sand over the top. I will say that I have had a much better success rate when you plant the Gemmae directly on top of the peat moss without any coverings. Now with the sand coverings, I got maybe close to 75 to 80% germination rate. And they were very, very slow to start. It took them about 2 months to actually grow through the sand because of the decreased light levels. I have the best luck within, 3 or 4 days of planting directly on top of the peat moss under intense lights. They will be sprouting and already growing roots within sometimes 3 to 4 days. So I highly recommend planting them directly on top of the peat moss with nothing on top of them. If you want sand over the top of them, wait until the plants get big enough and then go through and cover, put the sand on around your seedlings once they've already germinated. Now, on to planting. What you're going to do is you're going to open up your paper towel and you're going to lay that on a flat surface. You'll take your toothpick and you're just going to, I usually dip it in a little cup of distilled water, and that will create a very wet surface on your tool that will allow you to gently touch that against the Gemmae, and it should stick to the end. Then you're just going to hover that over the soil and gently scrape them off onto the soil. I do not use any pressure whatsoever. I literally just set it on there, let it stick to the object that you're using to plant, and dip them onto the soil. It's as easy as that. Now, it may take a few tries for you to get used to that because the Gemmae are exceptionally small. They're going to be tiny. And most people are like, wow, I didn't think they would be that small. But they're pretty small, which makes the task a little time consuming and a little tedious. But this will be the easiest way to acquire pygmy sundews, is by buying Gemmae. It's a cheap and efficient way of starting your own collection. Now, whenever you get all of your Gemmae planted and you're thinking, okay, now what? What you're going to do is you're going to set them in a tray of distilled water with a humidity dome over the top. Now, some of you might not have humidity domes, so you can either use saran wrap and cover the top of your pot and then rubber band it on there to create like a barrier to keep the humidity high. You can use humidity domes like one of the little seedling kits that come with. You can put the little humidity dome over your pots, or you can just simply bag them in a plastic bag, like a clear Ziploc bag. Set them in there, Ziploc them closed, and then just open that once or twice a day to make sure that airflow gets in. But you want to make sure that humidity stays high. The higher amount of humidity, 80% or above, the higher germination rate you will have. So I keep my personal Gemmae around 90 to 100% humidity, and I have either a 98% to 100% germination rate on all of my Gemmae that are planted in that manner. So for me, one of the most important things for your newly planted Gemmae is intense lighting. I recommend 14 to 16 hours a day and humidity of 80% or higher. Try to shoot for about 100% humidity because you will get a better germination rate. Now let's talk about temperatures. I have found that pygmy sundews have been very forgiving of temperatures below 85 degrees. When you start getting into the 80s and 90s, if you do this for a long period of time, more than a couple of days, your plants will start to go dormant. Because they are from Australia, it's kind of opposite. Instead of cold weather triggering dormancy, it is actually heat. So your worst enemy for your pygmy sundews are most likely going to be heat. I germinate all of my pygmy sundews in about 55 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Most commonly 60 to 75 degrees is about where I have the best success. Fahrenheit, which is about 15 to 21 degrees Celsius. So if you keep your humidity levels and your light levels fairly high, a south facing window, or if you have grow lights, put them under your grow lights. I use LED lights in a west facing window for 16 hours a day, and I can get adult plants from Gemmae to adult in about 2 months. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, so I've got my plants, they're planted, they're under the lights, I've got conditions right. How do I water the plants? Because most of you are probably going to be planting your Gemmae directly on top of the soil, if you keep your plants sitting in a tray of water, you should always notice that it should be fairly soppy all the way through the pot, especially around the surface. It should look pretty wet. That will create an ideal growing environment for your Gemmae. However, if you notice that your humidity is kind of low, or it's kind of dried out a little bit and you've still got water in the bottom of your tray or your bag, you can go ahead and mist over the top. Just make sure that you mist very carefully, because if you mist with a hard mister, you may end up shifting your Gemmae around or blowing them off the top of the soil because they are very, very small. And large grains of water, like if you're using a watering can and you water over the top of it, most likely you will wash your Gemmae off your pot. So you have to be very, very careful and very, very, you have to water it with care, or you may disturb your Gemmae or completely overwater the pot and wash them away. And just keep in mind that because they are carnivorous, that you have to use distilled water only, or rainwater, as long as it's been collected in a safe space. So you can't basically use rainwater that's run off your roof, because of the accumulated minerals and stuff that run off your roof and collect in the water barrel. I don't recommend using that. So I usually use distilled water. You can buy it pretty cheap at any grocery store. Or you can make your own with your own reverse osmosis distilled water unit. They have them that you could buy and make your own water at home. Or you can just buy it already made. Now, once you get your plants to a few months old, couple months, month and a half, depending on if your conditions are right, some may grow a little bit slower than others. Some may germinate slower than others. I've noticed that my occidentalis usually takes a little bit longer than some of, like, we'll say like my micrantha. Most on average though, within a week I see germination. If you have sand on the top, it took about a month or two for mine to actually germinate if there was sand on the top. So I did not really like that method. It was very slow, the plant seemed to struggle, and the growth pattern was a little reduced. But I've had excellent success with planting them directly on the peat moss. With high humidity and intense lighting, within usually 3 or 4 days, they're already sprouting. So I do get asked, does humidity matter for adult plants? No. In my opinion, humidity really isn't as important to an adult plant as it is for germination of Gemmae. So my adult plants have been fine in anything about 30 to 50% humidity, no problems on the average day. Now, when you're germinating your Gemmae, I always recommend 90 to 100% humidity to get the highest success rate. And then as your plants grow, once they start reaching adulthood, then you can go ahead and slowly start decreasing the humidity to acclimate them back to your household level, or your growing conditions that you want them to grow in. You can lower the humidity needs by slowly acclimating them to that. This concludes today's episode of what we've talked about. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this. We will be doing a few more carnivorous plant videos here in the upcoming weeks, so keep an eye out for those. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.